What's up guys? So today we're back in ancient Egypt and we're going to be building another beautiful, colourful ancient Egyptian house with a couple of cool features, perfect for any desert town or city. So before we actually start building, did you know that most ancient Egyptian houses were actually made of painted mud brick? And this is something that I've tried to replicate in this build today. So without further ado, we're going to get onto the build. So the base that we're going to be using in this build today is a 19 block by 9 block. So it's a very simple rectangular shape, and we're going to be making a couple of corners here or there, but it's a really simple shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start making my floor. Now, I'm going to be using chiseled quartz blocks in this example, because I quite like the texture and whatever, but you can use, the just normal sandstone, smooth sandstone, really anything you like. Something that's a lighter colour that's going to be a nice floor material. Now the shape I'm going for here, I've got two rectangles. So I've got a rectangle to the right and I've got a rectangle to the left, which is a slightly narrower 3 wide rectangle. And you're going to have this basic shape like this. So you're going to want to come above or look above your building and then try and get the general shape. Now I'm going to be filling this in, but the thing is that what you can do is you can add a little bit of wall into the floor and that acts as a carpet rather than actually adding the really annoying carpet that you can't place anything on top of. So I'm just going to be knocking out 6 blocks here, sticking some red wool in. That's going to be my carpet on the floor. Super simple shape, and that gets you started for the first step. Now the next step, we're going to start building the walls up. So the first block I'm going to take smooth red sandstone, and this is basically going to have the corner pillars, and they're going to be like this painted orange colour, which was quite typical to ancient Egyptian houses. This very earthy orange colour that they would have used with natural pigments. Now on this left side here, I'm just going to be running this block all the way around the bottom, but I'm going to knock out 3 in the middle here. And in this 3 in the middle, I'm going to place some smooth red sandstone stairs. And this texture right here, we're just going to have a small indent into the wall as we build up here, an extra block. And this is going to have a small indent into the wall. It just adds a little bit of depth into our wall, which is something that was pretty common in these types of ancient Egyptian buildings. Now the next thing I'm going to be doing, I'm going to take Chiselled Sandstone at the bottom, and this is going to be our foundation block at the bottom of the building. So I quite like the Chiselled Sandstone, looks like hieroglyphs. And then in the corners, we're going to take bone blocks. So anything really, I'm using bone blocks, but anything that's like a whitish colour, perfect block for this. And take them 2 high. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to get some smooth quartz blocks, and we're going to take them onto this left side of the building, and we're going to build 2 up here, leaving some 2 gaps in there, and then we're going to fill in all this side and the back with 2 high blocks. And this is going to be the slightly lower floor, which we're going to then cap off with a couple of slabs, which are going to make our windows. And this means that we've got colours either side. Now the next bit, we're going to build basically the ceiling for this next floor. And we're going to take some quartz bricks. Super simple shapes. And then these gaps in the walls we're going to fill with smooth sandstone, but with a couple of them we're going to leave a couple of gaps, as I'm going to show here, which we're going to put some upside down smooth sandstone stairs, and it's going to make a small little window. Now on this right side, fill in 4 blocks either side and leave that 2 gap in the middle. We're going to come back to that later in the video. That's going to be the side window basically. Now this one here, we're going to do the same as the front. We're going to leave a 2 gap upside down stairs. And then this side here, just fill it all in. That's where our main staircase is going to go. So there's no point in putting any windows in there. Now for our next step, take some red cut sandstone into the doorway. And then on the top, we're going to put just a single block layer of smooth red sandstone all the way around the top of the building. Super easy. And that's going to add a red band or reddish orange band to the top of our building. Now, if you don't have a Badlands biome near you, you can substitute this for acacia wood or acacia planks. Good idea. And then here we're going to be building this, I'm going to go into this bit later in the video. It's a cornice. So you could substitute this for copper as well if you don't want to go and get dark prismarine. And then we're just adding a couple of details here. So just warp buttons, coloured buttons. You don't have to make it a blue warped button. You could do any button colour, really whatever button that you can find, or out of any wood that you can find. It's just adding an extra little bit of detail to your build. Now for the next step, we're going to come on top of the building and we're going to basically add smooth quartz blocks. Now on this side, we're going to leave that 2 gap in the middle again, but this time we're going to fill that in a little bit later. Now in the front, what we're going to do is we're going to basically have a window pattern, but we're going to use stairs and slabs. Now this gets a little bit complicated. You might want to slow the video down for this. But we're going to take upside down stairs, single stairs, and we basically want to make this shape where you have a smaller window, then a bigger window, smaller window, that sort of idea. As you can see, the window shape kind of changes along the top of the building. And then on this side, we're just going to do smooth quartz blocks, smooth quartz slabs, so you get a 1 block gap in the middle there. And then we're going to get a 1 block gap in the middle there by making it with 4 stairs. So it's again getting those same shapes that are repeating along the building, but with lots of different stairs and slabs. And as I said before, we're going to fill that one in there. Now along the back, you're going to just fill in the whole of the wall with just 2 high smooth quartz blocks. Same here, but we're going to leave a 2 gap in the middle and just put 1 slab on top. And the reason why I'm doing that, just 1 slab on top, is because basically with, in later versions of Minecraft, you can basically fit through this gap if you crouch. So you can reach the top of the roof like they would have done in many parts of ancient Egypt. They slept on roofs, they hung out on roofs, that sort of stuff. It means that you can do that. Talking about roofs, what we're going to do is we're going to start filling in the roofs. Super easy. So what I quite like to do with a lot of the desert builds that I do, or things like this, I like to mix birch planks with sandstone, as I'm just putting some sandstone walls on the top of there as well. And the reason why I like to mix these two together is because it makes like a cool texture on top. It's a mix of colours, but then it also looks like if you were to have papyrus reeds or something like that, that's the kind of main top of your roof, and then that's been covered with dirt or mud, dried mud, and in the wind, in the heat of the sun, it started to crackle off. So it's kind of random. I mean, what I'm doing here is pretty random, to be honest. It's just about you place kind of random bits of birch, random bits of sandstone, and then it turns out in like a nice texture in the end. You just got to be a little bit patient with it. Or you can just replicate exactly what I'm doing here. I mean, I find that this one that I'm doing right here works quite well, but again, it's up to personal preference. You could just fill in the whole thing with birch, or you could just fill in the whole thing with sandstone. Now right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something called a cavetto cornice. Now this was a very, very typical ancient Egyptian architectural feature, and it's kind of believed to mimic the actual tops of exposed reeds on some of the older pre-dynastic traditional Egyptian buildings. And it's quite funny how in like lots of ancient Egyptian architecture, they replicated basically things in stone, which they built before in things like wood and reeds and that sort of stuff. And I'm building this with dark prismarine slabs, the waxed weathered copper, upside down stairs, and then I'm going to take some crimson signs. Again, you can really mix the colours up on these. I'm doing this because I like the mix of green and purple, but again, it's personal preference. You can do this in red, you can do this in blue, you can do this in other green colours. It's about adding a bit of colour to it. Speaking of blue and green, I'm going to add some warped signs on the bottom, just on all of these chiselled sandstone blocks. And again, it's just like a coloured stripe. It adds another bit of colour to these. A lot of these ancient Egyptian buildings, the more like high-class residential buildings, they add a lot of colour to them. And we're going to start building an awning out the front, just with some spruce fence gates right there, and then on this window as well. And awnings actually were believed to have originated in ancient Egypt, which is it's quite convenient for the sake of building these, but they were designed to basically shade areas of buildings or walkways or places where people would be selling things, and it just kept people cool in the hot desert sun in most of the months of the year in ancient Egypt. And I'm just going to be covering these with a bit of carpet. Now this top one, I'm going to be changing this to spruce trapdoors instead rather than strings. I think it looks a little bit better if you do it like this. It just looks like it's got a bit more structure. But again, it really is personal preference on what colour you want to do. I think the orange and the blue work quite well together, but red would look nice, yellow would even look nice, black. It really depends on what you want to do. And here, this is an optional bit. I'm just going to add a little plant pot at the bottom. A little bit of extra decoration. So just a couple of final things before we go and do the detailing of this building. So I'm just going to fill in the ceiling. And this is super simple, just normal sandstone blocks or anything similar to that. And I'm going to be leaving a little gap on this side for our staircase, so I'm just going to knock a few out here. So what you basically want to do is you want to have this staircase that's running down here. I'm going to try and calculate this right now. So you want to have one as you're landing at the top, and then we're basically just going to, build down. I'm just going to leave this for the moment. That's going to be where the staircase is. So you can basically fit, you can fit all the way up, like that, there you go. And you'll be able to go up your staircase. Now on this side, as we've left this already, we're just going to fill this in with slabs. So you're just going to take smooth sandstone slabs and just fill that in. And that gives you your higher window, but it also means that the same material is bound all the way around. Now I'm going to come back and edit this. You can leave this as string, but I do actually think the trapdoors look a bit better as the awning right there. So I'm just going to change that, put your carpets back on top. And what I'm going to do here is I've got an orange banner. Now this is a super, super simple one. If you look on screen, we've just got the actual patterns that I've used. And you can make this in any loom, or even if you're playing creative, you can use like a banner generator online. And this is a super simple textile pattern. Now, if you don't want to use this in survival, you can just use an orange banner. But I think it looks really, really nice with a little bit of extra detail and texture. It just adds a little bit more arts and crafts to these buildings, which if you've researched anything into Egyptian architecture, they just painted loads of stuff all over their buildings. Now again, not to forget, we want to add some climbing plants to the side, so I'm just mixing and mashing birch leaves, fences, super simple. And then on the front in my flower pot, my plant pot, I'm just going to add a large fern. It looks a bit like a palm tree. Super, super simple. Maybe add a couple of banners on the outside to look like hanging clothes or hanging linen or robes. And that is the basic structure. If you don't want to do any interior, you can stop now. But if you want to, perfect. So for this staircase, I'm going to take some polished diorite stairs. Now, that's going to be your white staircase. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically make a lotus reed pattern in the wall. Now, this is quite a common thing that they painted in lots of walls on temples and tombs, and houses in ancient Egypt as well. And I'm going to be doing this with the stripped bamboo block. It kind of looks like reeds. It's to get that same idea of like carvings. And I'm going to do the same thing with putting the quartz pillars on top. So it has this linear pattern that runs up and down, which looks like the lotus reeds, I think. Now I'm going to take a couple of just normal diorite walls, and they're going to be our pillars in the middle of the house. It's just purely decorative, but it looks quite nice. And then, this is just an example of what I'm doing for the interior. You can really now, from this point, just fill it in, if you're building in survival or if you're building in creative. This is kind of a good idea of what you can do. So I'm going to be adding things like candle holders, some tables, like, dark oak trapdoor table, something like that. I'm going to have to go the other side. And the thing is with a lot of that I find, or, is a bit of a challenge when making ancient Egyptian style interiors, is actually trying to have enough things that are like tables, but then having lots of things that look like cushions or like benches. Because if you have a look at some ancient Egyptian artifacts and you go to some museums, or you look at like some of the old tombs, a lot of the furniture is actually quite low sitting. They didn't have massively backed chairs from what I can see. It was lots of like smaller stools and smaller seats. So I'm trying to replicate that bit basically here. Alright guys, so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to be filling in a couple of extra things. And then on this ceiling here, I'm just going to be placing some struts or like some joists. And I'm just going to be using jungle trapdoors. That's going to be the super simple thing to do with this. It really complements the colours, I think. But I, also like spruce would look quite nice. It's a darker colour, or even mangrove. Really depends on what you have and what materials you can get in survival. But if you're in creative, knock yourself out, do what you want with it, to be honest. I'm going to add a couple of banners here as well. It looks like, hanging linens or whatever. I think that looks really nice. Now in the back room here, I'm just going to be making this small little book library corner. In fact, here we can probably fill this in as well, just with some extra pillars. And then I'm going to be taking upside down spruce stairs, and this can be a bit of a challenge to make it work in placing the actual blocks themselves if you can't fly. But it basically makes it look like they're holes for scrolls. It's like a bookshelf for scrolls rather than just for books. So you've got books and we've got scrolls. You've got a nice mix there. I'm going to fill this one in too. But in terms of lighting, I mean, I quite like to use the lanterns. You can just use candles if you want to be super historically accurate. So in this back thing here, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make like a reed papyrus pattern, but I'm going to actually make the tops of the lotus flowers if, you know, we're going to go with that example. And I'm literally just taking on my keyboard square brackets, then I'm going to put W space, W space, W, you see what I'm doing here. And that's going to be like the kind of branch into the top of the flower. And then I'm going to take this line element, 2 spaces, line, 2 spaces, line, 2 spaces. You can use actually the just the colon as well. You just line 2 spaces underneath on the bottom, and I think it looks like these, you know, flowers that are coming up. You know, you can just leave this if you don't want to have loads of entities, but yeah. And then in creative, if you just control mouse wheel click it, then yeah, you can pick that same sign up. And I find that, you know, the sign adds a little bit of extra patterns to it. I mean, the things with ancient Egyptian buildings, they had loads of stuff on the wall, so it really is like choosing where you're going to put details on the walls. But, you know, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. It's kind of an optional thing to do. And that's pretty much it for the bottom floor, I think. So I think the only things we've got to do now is then we've got to do the top floor. So the top floor, again, is super simple. I've kept this one super simple for this build. I'm just going to be filling in like a railing here with some mangrove trapdoors, some bookshelves up here. And then I'm going to take a black bed, just put some signs either side of them because it makes it look a little bit, you know, fancier. But again, just any type of bed. So you basically get the general idea, and then here I'm basically just adding loads and loads and loads of decorations. So I'm going to add some fences, which are going to be a pillar, some pots around the place, and then it's about, again, we're going to be placing those joists, i.e. the jungle trapdoors, across the top, and that's going to add, you know, a little bit of depth into our roof, a little bit of structure. And again, you can, you know, another reason why you can do this is you can hang banners off it, so it adds something that looks like hanging linens. So you can get through here as well, as I mentioned earlier. And it just means that you don't have like a, you know, an empty ceiling top of the door there, sorry. Now, super simple thing what I'm going to do here. I don't want to add loads of furniture up here. I just want it to feel like a some sort of bedroom area where people can sit on the floor and they can play games, or they can, you know, do all sorts of stuff. They can read up here on the floor, or they can read on the bed. So, you know, the simple thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, you know, this plant on top of these 2 lightning rods. Which is going to be like a nice like plant feature, and then I'm going to just add loads and loads of carpets. Now it's about mixing like different colours really, but you know, it's all preference on what colours you want to place it. But here I'm doing basically just, you know, red, orange, cyan, guys, super simple, and just kind of overlap them to make it look like the carpets are going on top of each other. But again, it's about kind of going around and playing with what you want to do with it. Place a couple of lanterns for your light in here. And then again, as I mentioned, just put your flower pot on top of that. And that is pretty much it for the upstairs. I mean, you can make it a bit more fancy. You can add a few more things into it. I mean, like here, okay, that might be like a cushion in the room. You know, maybe I'd place it there. You know, something that, you know, adds a little bit to make it look a bit more soft and comfy on the inside. Maybe you can have some banners hanging from the roof, but for the sake of this, I think it looks fine as is. Maybe a couple of more lanterns. But it makes it super simple. You know, outside again, you can place some, you know, flower pots on the outside. Super, super simple, guys. Super, super simple. It's also about, you know, if you're doing this in survival, you can really just, there's a lot of space up there. You can divide the space, you can add an enchanting room, something like that. I mean, this side room here could be a great enchanting room, just totally separate to everything else. And that is basically it, guys. That is just the basic building. You know, you can add landscaping around this, or you can add lots of different things. But I really hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've learned a little bit about ancient Egyptian architecture as well. And let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know the type of stuff, you know, other Egyptian buildings that we can maybe build in the future, other themes and whatnot. But yeah, I'm going to give you a quick exploration. So we've got our library room, we've got our main room in the bottom here, and then we've got our upstairs. Super, super simple. And then our balcony out on the side. And you can see, you know, you can place this in a city, a town, and it's the perfect kind of building for that. So yeah, guys, I want to say thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video today. Hope you found it useful. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.